I was thinking about this, and at this 2015 Cactus and Succulent Society of America convention, they're amazing experts, and we've had wonderful slides and photos, and I've decided I'm going to switch over to other genera, and I'm going to just forget about Dudleyas now, because there's so many other beautiful plants. But I'm also thinking about some comments that people made. They're these tremendous experts, and people are feeling like, oh, gee, I'm a beginner here. Well, we're all beginners in one aspect or another, and a friend of mine who's an ornithologist is always telling me to, take a time and look at things with fresh eyes. Yesterday I had a little bit of time. I drove up over Glendora Ridge. I hadn't been on one particular road near here, and I might have to tweak a little thing that I had in the Jepson manual. Key about Dudley is about where something occurs. So if you keep fresh eyes, you're always learning new things. We're all beginners in a lot of ways. So that's one theme, is that we're all beginners, and the other is conservation. And I want to talk a lot about a lot of different rare and endangered things. We've got some Dudleya bretonii, not as endangered as some. It looked a little more prolific when it seemed like the highway department spread it all along in the 80s. It was spread all along the roadway there. It looked a little more like it had a bigger distribution. A lot of people like to pair them with something dark. Pretty easy to grow from seed, and they can be with any number of different beautiful agaves and such. So there are a lot of rare Dudleya species. There's so many that I couldn't fit them all into one talk. 8 are federally threatened or endangered. I went through the California Native Plant Society criteria for what's rare and endangered, and I tried to apply that to Baja California too. And maybe 36 or so are rare or endangered in one fashion or another. Dudleya formosa, a beautiful Dudleya. There are a lot of Dudleyas that confuse me and confuse a lot of people, but Dudleya formosa is a wonderful, attractive species. Only grows in one canyon. There's some development above the canyon. People could easily start throwing trash over the sides of the cliff, or dumping their yard waste, and you start getting jade plants or whatever growing on the hillside. It hybridizes in nature with other things. There are some threats to this beautiful Dudleya formosa. Like most Dudleyas, exceptionally easy from seed. Rancho Santa Ana has a plant. I have some plants, and I'm growing up a lot of seedlings of this. Throughout the convention, a lot of people talked about these really rare things, or some of the things that we're excited about. Why are they rare? Sometimes it takes a fresh look to say, okay, well, why is this particular one rare? Is it the substrate chemistry? You see these things with the white quartz or the reddish quartz or the limestone or what have you. How much moisture is around? Is that substrate? Is it just a small patch rather than miles and miles and miles? Sometimes with some of these things, we're looking for them, and people were saying, oh yeah, you look on this one hilltop, you find it, and you expect it on the next 10 hilltops, but it's not there. And some really minor aspect of weather, maybe it's the fog, the heat, some places a little more or better protected from frost. Some of these coastal plants. I have some coastal plants. I dumped them in seawater just to play around and see how they would survive. They came out of the seawater and they were still alive, but one of the things I was surprised is all the mealybugs died. But it has to be cold seawater where it's flushing through all of this time. You get a hot bucket of seawater and it kills the plants. But anyway, that might give us a clue. Why are these things growing right next to the coast where there's a lot of salt spray? Well, maybe that's affecting the insects that are eating it. There's a lot going on if we take some time, we do an experiment, or we just pay a little more attention. Maybe part of its history. Either something has recently evolved in that area, or maybe it used to be much more widespread. The climate is changing and it's getting a smaller and smaller range. A lot of different possibilities. So looking at Dudleya pulverulenta, very widespread, Dudleya lanceolata, widespread on deep soils. But then I was looking at other species. They're widespread on rocks. And so I can't just generalize. The Santa Clara Valley serpentine soil around in some of these foothills here, federally endangered species. It only grows on the serpentine, the serpentinite soils, these real pale color of petals here, and you can't really see the rosette, but a kind of a purplish, reddish, grayish rosette. Some people have pointed out to me a plant that grows a half a mile away with a really different color rosette and a really different color of flower. It's completely different and much rarer than the federally endangered one. You know, the type, couple of California Native Plant Society women in their 70s or 80s pretending they're out on a picnic. They're kind of looking at plants. The person who owns the land came over and started yelling at them, these innocent-looking women. So it's hard to figure out how to work on this when it's on somebody's ranch, and it's a very tiny area. Going to another serpentine endemic, Dudleya Abramsii bettini. The first time I was looking for this, somebody told me where it was. I went out looking for it. Turns out a lot of my looking, I'm driving from place to place. I looked someplace in the morning, and by the time I got here, it was at 9 o'clock at night. There was a big storm. I was kind of confused why there was driftwood on some of the roads. The pier that was right there washed away that evening. And so I'm out there with a flashlight in my mouth, kind of scrambling up on rocks, looking. Anyway, that was the first time I ever saw it, was at night in a storm. But there are easier ways to see it. This is kind of an obscure thing, but if anybody happens to look at my key in the Jepson, it's online, it's free. You just say Jepson Manual Dudleya, and it has the key to the Dudleyas of California. It says wounding red, and you see the base of the leaf here at the top. There's a little bit of reddish. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's a character, wounding red or not, or wounding yellow or not. And sometimes that's in a key, and I just thought I'd, for those of you who've never heard of that and had no idea what I was talking about, that's the character. Just you pull it off, it's clear for a split second, and then it turns a little pinkish, purplish. It's more obvious in some than others. Generally, in the keys, it sounds like there are about 3 or 4 different flower shapes, the Dudleyas. But if you start looking at them, this is. I just went out into the greenhouse and I was giving a workshop, a 2-day workshop on Dudleyas, and these were the ones that were flowering that particular day. And so I did 2 full days of Dudleyas, and I'm hoping I've got enough time. How long can I go, Kelly?
4 hours.
To cover all of the Dudleyas that I want to cover today. They grow from the tip of Baja California up into Oregon, just barely into Oregon. There are rumors of a second species in Oregon that are pretty obscure. Arizona to Nevada and just barely into Utah. The Dudleya arizonica is supposed to be endangered and a rare species in Nevada. But I've talked to a fellow from Utah who drives all over the middle of nowhere in Nevada and has found it in a number of places, so it's not that rare. And Dudleya barely get into mainland Mexico. There are a lot on the islands, 22 species on islands. Some are single island endemics. And so anyway, there are a lot on the islands, and it's great because I get to go out on islands and look for these things. We'll move to the Sierra, and then we'll do a little geographic jumping around. I had heard of this Dudleya cymosa costatifolia, only growing on limestone. Was at this family reunion, 14 people in 2 houses. It seemed like a good day to, just go and look for Dudleyas. And I didn't find it the first time. And I thought it had decent directions. I got directions from 2 people the next time, and I didn't find it the second time. And usually I can find Dudleya in the middle of the night. And the first time I ever found Dudleya, Tom Mulroy says, go look for Dudleya visita, and he told me where to find it, and I find it, with the headlights in my car. But I couldn't find it the second time. And the third time I'm driving up I-5, and I say, I should just go over there and look at it. And by the time I get there, it's dark. But I had better directions, and so I start walking along, and it's dark, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I see these eyes in the forest, and I'm kind of nervous. And, there could be mountain lions up here, and it turns out it's 3 deer, So I walk to the end of the road is gone, I'm bushwhacking with a flashlight trying to find this limestone outcrop, and I see another set of eyes, and they're a little lower. And I says, I'm going to leave. And I turn around and walk, and I keep looking back, and it seems like it's following me. And you don't know whether it's really following you or not, but I got out of there. And the 4th time, I did come out and find it. This is the typical form that's on limestone a quarter mile away. And this is the form that's only on the limestone and only there and nowhere else in the world. It's relatively protected. That first time I looked for it, I got stopped by a wall of poison oak. They're rattlesnakes. You have to do some climbing to get to it. The rock's sharp. If you fall, you land on the Hespero yuccas. Anyway, I'm not as worried about this one as I am about some things. But it's out there, and you see the penny. So it's really, really branched and tiny rosettes. For those of you who do know a Dudleya cymosa, that having the tiny rosettes like that is a very unusual thing. Anyway, it's on this white limestone with not a whole lot of things, Selaginella, the Dudleya, the Hespero yucca. So anyway, that was a rare one that's protected to some extent. And then let's see, orient you a little bit with the map. Done a lot of work in the Santa Monica Mountains and then out in the Channel Islands. And let's go to Santa Cruz Island. Ralph Hoffman was looking for different things. He found Erebus hoffmanii. That's what one of my students is looking for. Steve Junak sent me over a cliff to find Erebus hoffmanii, the type. And Hoffman, I don't have all these stories of people with guns and things, but Ralph Hoffman was on the island next to this, apparently looking for Dudleyas, and he fell off and he died, and in the 1930s. And so there's Hoffman Point, and there's Erebus hoffmanii, and there's Dudleya hoffmanii that was lumped. Anyway, so we use ropes nowadays. They had never had Dudleya blockmanii, subspecies blockmanii, out on the Channel Islands. I was walking along, we're ready to head back out to the boat, and I'm just about to step down, and I look and I'm almost stepping on these things that half of the year you don't see them at all. And so it was a new record for the island, and that was kind of fun. In terms of growing these things, if you have somebody helping you with your plants, when they go completely dormant and they go away, don't let the people throw away your pots. The best thing to do with these is come May or June, stop watering them. A little while longer, just stick them in some light shade, let them go along. For most of these summer dormant Dudleyas, I tried this with a few of them. I watered them once a week all through the summer, and that's supposed to kill them. But they just sat there, and they just sat there. October 1st, I hadn't watered it for a week. I watered it. Within an hour, I had like 2 millimeter tall leaves. So some of these are very strictly summer dormant, and just stick them in the shade. They're remarkably easy from seed, so you don't need to dig up the little corm-like structures. In a good year out on Santa Cruz Island, the very west end of Santa Cruz Island, you can see wildflower fields, and I was really pleased when I got out here because the wildflowers included Dudleyas. These short, all of the flowers here are about 3 inches tall. You've got gold fields and little onions and the Dudleya nesioticas. In terms of the summer dormant Dudleyas, this is the easiest one to grow. It might even grow through the summer, though it's probably better to leave it dry. They have bigger flowers. They're a little more upright. Some of the hybrids are pretty cool and a little more evergreen. So if you're going to start with a summer dormant one, this is a good one. The Dudleya nesiotica is only on that one part of Santa Cruz Island, nowhere else in the world. It's protected by the National Park Service. So that's a rare Dudleya that's doing pretty well as long as we continue to get a certain amount of rain, not too little and not too much, they're doing pretty well. Out on Santa Cruz Island, Dudleya greenii has, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 30 different forms. It's just a mess for a taxonomist. However, there's one group of plants that has been called white star. You can see the inflorescence is hidden down. It's no taller than the lichens that are growing with it. They don't tend to branch very much. They're kind of chunky leaves. And so this might end up being a new species. So far, we're just calling it white star. It's pretty uncommon, but it's protected so well by the cliffs that it's probably going to survive on its own. The peregrine falcons try and protect it also. They were dive bombing us, even though we didn't really get close to the cliffs at all, and they kept dive bombing us for about a quarter or a half a mile. We were holding sticks over our heads, just trying to stay away. But this is protected pretty well. There's another rare one across the channel, Dudleya blockmanni insularis, kind of a splitters species, a little more wax on it. This is a whole pot full of seedlings. They're so easy to grow from seed. And a few more leaves, thinner leaves, and a little more wax than the regular blockmanni. This is an unnamed batch of things related to Dudleya cymosa marcescens. I didn't put on a name because I don't know whether it's new or not. You're seeing almost the entire extent of the population. Maybe it should just be lumped with cymosa marcescens that hybridizes with about 4 other things in the Santa Monica Mountains. But they're so bright that I couldn't photograph them properly. It just blows everything out. And about 2 inches tall, so potentially a new species. Photographing a lot of these things is tough. This is a local species, 20 minutes from here. And this is a photo from 30 years ago. Now they make it a little more difficult to get to this spot. You have to climb a 10-foot fence in order to photograph this. And that involves some rock climbing skills. You can't park anywhere near it any longer. And so this is one species that has been harmed, I think, quite a bit by collectors. When I was first looking for it in 83, 84, you couldn't find any down low. They were only 15, 20 feet on really friable rock up the rock. And so it was an indication to me that there was a lot of collecting happening. Most Dudleyas are easy as can be from seed. This one isn't. If somebody knows a trick, tell me otherwise afterwards. I think I probably need to get 2 of them flowering at once and hand pollinate it. This one, I've seen them for sale or seen them in people's collections, and I go there and it's Dudleya cespitosa or Dudleya greenii that's seeded in and the original ones died. So anyway, this is one that's very rare, threatened by mining and collectors. And so education is a big part of the discussion for that. When I first went looking for Dudleya stolonifera, I had some clues about where it was. People said it's on Irvine Company land. They've got guns. You shouldn't go over there. It's nothing like what people were talking about in Mexico. But anyway, I did have to sneak in and try and find these things. Became kind of a special plant in the Laguna area. People use this as the logo for the California Native Plant Society chapter. They got a park made because there were 2 things going on. There were endangered species that they wanted to protect. They wanted to protect this Dudleya, and they wanted some open space in a park, and it all went hand in hand. And so this species that's protected only a little bit by the rocks, and it grows profusely in the shade. At least part of the day. It's a clue for growing it. Again, an easy one from seed, though if it's in your greenhouse, it may hybridize with anything you've got there. The Dudleyas are promiscuous. I've crossed everything with everything. If you isolate it, you can get nice pure seed. I think there was one over in the sale early on, and that's long since sold, unless somebody else still has some. Easy to grow. Only one that produces stolons. Kind of a lousy photo of multicollis that grows near stolonifera, but development has been affecting this. This is not one affected by collecting too much, though it could be. It's on the Irvine campus, and there's been development there that's reduced the population. So since that wasn't a good photo, I wanted to move over to another area with a better photo, going to Torrey Pines. I wish I could show you all the beautiful plants that occur with all of these wonderful Dudleyas, but I have to limit myself now and again. But the Mariposa lilies are hard not to take photos of now and again. The Coryzanthe out there, the spine flowers are really cool. For those of you, if you're just a beginner pressing plants, you've got a plant press for the first time. Some things that are easy are ferns, and these Coryzanthe, I mean, they can just look stunning, as long as it's not one of the endangered Coryzanthes, one of the endangered spine flowers, but they just press remarkably attractively. So out there, associated with these tiny little pebbles, are plants that the lower bracts on them look like the tiny pebbles. And I don't even know if we can see any stem leaves or stem leaves or the rosette leaves, but they look kind of like these little round iron nodules here. Occurs at Torrey Pines State Park. There's a Torrey Pines golf course that Tiger Woods goes to. That took out some habitat. When I was first looking for Dudleyas, I had Reed Moran's thesis, the Bible of Dudleyas at the time, and it says Mesa tops San Diego County for a lot of these different species, and that's why a lot of things are endangered. And he had kind of a unique reason for splitting this out from Dudleya blackmanii. He said, the intermediate populations have been wiped out by development, so now I view these as separate species. And it was about 3 lines long in a tiny little article. But lovely tiny little Dudleyas. They're not the smallest succulents in the world, but they are pretty small. You can see just a diagram of the little sort of balloon-like leaves. Here's a big old plant in the sand with one flower that's less than a centimeter across, and all the leaves have already dried up. This is going to be gone in a little while, but it's going to it'll produce seed, and hopefully they'll germinate. So this has really been hammered by development and can be also disturbed by trampling and collecting. Let's see, which I'm trying to think where I'm headed next. Oh, I know where I'm headed next. So I'm headed down into this area of Baja California, part of the way down between Ensenada and San Quintin. And there's some beautiful agaves out that way, and I just love the spination and the bud printing on those. But what we were looking for was these boring little Dudleyas here. But it's wonderful. There's this sort of pan where it's a little bit of a depression, and we were talking about it today. There may be 10,000 of them in a few acres or several acres, but there's a potential that somebody could have gone out yesterday, or somebody could be out there with a plow today, and it could be gone. And there's a lot of development, there's a lot of agriculture there, and so this is, even though there may be 10,000 of these plants, it may be the most endangered of the Dudleya. It doesn't have a name yet. A friend of mine's been thinking about naming it for about 20 years, and so we're going to name it together. He gets to choose the species name, and anyway, we're working on it. It's got, the time I had out there with it was about an hour, but I found about 7 characters that separate it from everything else. in Dudleya if you've looked at Dudleya for a long time. And the key will work out so you can tell it from all the other Dudleyas. So we're pretty far along on the description. But we don't want people to lump it in with something else later on. This is a great sign that I pass in Watsonville all the time. So right near this, on a rocky mound, a different habitat. That previous one was in this kind of depression, and every once in a while there are these bumps that are about 1 foot high or 2 feet high. And the foot high and 2 feet high, you'll get agaves, and you'll get ferrocactus, and you'll get 2 other kinds of Dudleyas, but not in this slightly lower area that might have water for a little bit longer after a hard rain. Anyway, this is a slightly different habitat in the same general area, but it's up on a rocky mesa. Again, it's with these little round ball pebble-like iron nodules, and this was named relatively recently by Mark Dodaro as Dudleya crassifolia. There's another population that's pretty variable with just an amazing, this does not look like a Dudleya, amazing set, and these guys make you think we're in Africa or Mexico or someplace with these cryptic things hidden in the sand, which I didn't even notice until we got it on the big screen. And there's a little seedling right there that I hadn't noticed either. So it doesn't look like a Dudleya at all. The sand sort of builds up over it. There's a lot of variation depending on how it's grown and the time of year, regardless of how you're growing it and how much wax it looks like it has depending on the time of year. It might be hybridizing with things that are next to it. Maybe we lump it with the crassifolia that he's just named, or maybe that's another new species. A lot of problems with Dudleyas. And let's see where I'm headed next. I think it's Isla San Martin. Oh, yes, it is. Lovely lichens out on Isla San Martin. For Sula's sake, I'll try not to spend too much time talking about Isla San Martin because that's her territory. But there is a cactus in the photo. And I won't bother, since other people are arguing about what to call this, I won't worry about what to call it. And, whoops. But if you press that button very hard, it just moves along. Dudleya cultrata out on Isla San Martin and on the mainland. You cannot mistake this for the other thing that grows with it that's a little bit uncommon that we'll get to in just a minute. But these mounds of Echinocerius maritimus were, I mean, I don't know, 5 feet across or 6 feet across. It might have, I think this is 3 different clones, but I mean, from here to here is maybe 6 feet. This is huge mounds and just amazing growing with all of the lichens out there. But this is the one that people get excited about, Dudleya anthonyi. A little different than Pulveria lenta, not nearly so widespread. On the mainland, since I first went looking for them, with my 4-wheel drive, hoping not to get stuck in the sand. And in the 1980s, they put in a quarry, and there are areas that are gone on the mainland. So Isla San Martin is a really important habitat as a backup for the mainland populations. And I was only going to show one photo of the Dudleya anthonyi. And just show a couple of other things out there. They've got some cactus around, but I couldn't help myself. I don't know how, I think I took 250 photos, and I don't know how long we were on the island. It wasn't that long. And they're just amazing. Some of the ones that are sold are hybrids, but maybe they're better growers in cultivation. But they're very easy from seed. Use this as a seed parent if you're doing hybrids because the seeds are pretty decent size and they're so easy from seed. I was looking at this old plant up here that started here and it leaned down and came up here, and I don't know how old that is. Maybe that's 50, 60, 70 years old. Really nice Dudleya anthonyi. And then I was looking at this and said, oh my goodness, this other one started up here and went all the way down here. It's got 2 rosettes here, and that's maybe 6 feet long. And so I have no idea how old that is. And you can see the old flower stalk is 5 or 6 feet tall coming up from there. So, they're it's an amazing island. There were wonders every 4 feet. You couldn't help but step on things occasionally that you loved. Anyway, Jeremy showed this photo yesterday, Dudleya, Canada. This is off the Coronado Islands, off the coast of Baja, California, a little farther north than Isla San Martin. I was out there with Michael Benedict, who few of you might know, and he said when he was out there with Reed Moran 30, 35 years ago, he thinks Reed took a picture of the same plant, or at least the same species in the same spot, because it's right where you land, and it's scenic, and so the plant's still doing well years later, and you can see how coastal it is. This is on South Coronado Islands. There was going to be a big port and natural gas facility and all of that, and it's really great that the conservation work has helped with protecting the Coronado Islands. So that's a lot of work that's already been done. As long as I'm talking about these things and I keep mentioning seeds, I got my old penny. And, you know, we got at least four good-looking seeds here. They're not the smallest seeds of any of the species we've seen this conference, but they're pretty good, healthy-looking seeds. You sow them on top. You don't cover them with anything, maybe a little bit of perlite, but even sand sometimes cuts down the germination rate. So when you actually count these things, you find sometimes you get 100% germination rate if you just stick them on top. You get 90% germination rate from distantly related plants, hybrids. People do it all different ways. Everybody has success in different ways, but I plant them late October to February. Sometimes all of them germinate. So if you put 200 in a 3-inch pot, you're going to have too many in the pot. Don't cover them with anything. If you get these little tiny ball, you know, with 2 little cotyledons on them, and you forget to water them in March or April or May, and you say, oh, they all died, they're gone. Don't necessarily give them up. Treat them like a summer dormant Dudleya. Maybe continue watering them through May. You still don't see anything in the pot. You keep it in the shade. Come October 1st, you water it again and see if anything is still in the pot. I mean, there have been times when I swore there was nothing in the pot because I let it go completely dormant, and there was still something there. It seems like they're incredibly slow because I never fertilize. So if you give them weak fertilizer every few weeks, you'll get the seedlings coming along better, like real growers do, not like me. Anyway, they may hybridize, so kind of assume anything. If you got more than one species, you've got something growing near you a quarter mile away, who knows? I found some Dudleyas out on Punta Banda. The 2 species were about 3 miles apart, but there was a beehive right there, and I found hybrids right there, and so they all can hybridize. All right, so I'm quickly going to mention a couple of trips that I went on. You recognize 4 of the speakers who've already been here. There were 5 of us. Went to Cedros Island. Our guide, Jose, there, I'll mention him later. This is on Cedros Island at Jose's hotel. Just had a great old time with this trip from 2 years ago. Took another trip this last year that Sula, who's a speaker coming up, led. There were 26 of us, give or take, all manner of botanists and an anthropologist, herpetologist, videographer. We just had a great old time. I wish I could just do a program about these 2 trips, you know, one program about one trip and one program about the other trip. But there's not enough time, so I'll just say we had a great time. And we went to Cedros Island, and I was worried about the Cedros Island rattlesnakes, so I grabbed Sarah and pulled her back, and it was not a rattlesnake, fortunately, but the endemic Cedros Island gopher snake. I never photograph herps, but there was a herpetologist along from Mexico, and I started getting distracted from the plants. And this little guy was so cute and so amazing, and he couldn't climb over the water pipe. And so I got to get closer and closer and closer, and finally I actually stuck my finger under his back foot so he could climb over the water pipe and go on and not be bothered by me anymore. But I had a good old time looking at the herps. Everybody shows pictures of agave sebastiana. Yeah, I like Dudleyas, but I don't know how many pictures I have of agave sebastiana too. So Cedros Island, you've got cacti out there. Some of them were flowering in one trip or the other. The pachycormus, this is what it looks like in full flower. We went back after the hurricane had been through there, and you look at these groves and it looks like an oak grove. And you say, oh, that's kind of boring. And say, oh wait, those are all pachycormus, those aren't oak trees. But when they're just in flower, I don't know, they're remarkable plants. There are some places where they're windswept. This one was maybe 45 feet long and a couple feet tall. And when you can see the trunks, just one big old plant there. And they're there for a long time. And so on the western side of the island, they're completely windswept, and then protected areas on the other side of the canyons. Like I said, in the green time, they look like oak trees. And when they're just flowering, they're just a flower show. So I had seen this plant in 1984 when Jim Dice gave me Dice 323. And people say, oh, well, they're maybe a little different or not different. Or anyway, I'd been wanting to see this since 1984. And so we were going to fly out there, and the plane get canceled the last time. We got to rent a car and drive down to Guerrero Negro and catch a different plane out to the island and catch a boat to the northern part of the island, and then hike in about a mile and camp, and then hike 2 miles straight up, or felt straight up. And you can finally see these things. It's related to albiflora. Interesting, the bracts are pointed, and there's something about how they're nodding when they're in bud, and they're tiny little leaves, and the cacti all around. It's a pretty little spot. There's this other guy who was there too that I had wanted to see. Since I ever first saw one of those too. I've been wanting to see that since 83 or 84. You've heard of that one, Dudleya pachyphytum. Reed Moran talked about this as being one of his favorite places in the entire world. They're lumpers and splitters, and I think in this case we could probably split these apart as two different species of Dudleyas. But unfortunately there are places where this is a little confusing with some albifloras that are on the island. But sometimes you'll get 200 rosettes together, tightly compact. The rosette's smaller than a quarter. Very interesting, perhaps a new species. I wasn't going to show more than one Dudleya pachyphytum, but I lost my resolve. Anyway. They're just, and you can see all the fog. Both of these species grow together, the albiflora relative and the Dudleya pachyphytum. In this foggy area, there's lichen, there are pine trees. It's unlike the drier, lower parts of the rest of the island. But this little one, the albiflora relative, is perhaps more rare than the pachyphytum, but it's too steep to even find out. But the pachyphytum is one that gets collected too much. So it's all of you who have it, collect seed from it and grow more. I couldn't have been any happier. And then the pachycormus, it's out of flower, but it's providing shelter for Dudleya pachyphytum and agaves, just hidden under here in the shade. I don't know if that tells us anything about growing them, probably not. But excellent drainage, a lot of perlite in there. but not as dry as some Dudleyas maybe. Depends on where you are and who you are, how you grow them, but need tremendous drainage, but maybe more water than some Dudleya and more fertilizer than some Dudleya. I don't know. Anyway, I played around and I made some hybrids of some of these things and really tried to work on getting some of these out. This one might have had Farinosa crossed with Simosa as one of the parents. Some of them I crossed with Anthony I or what have you. I got a bunch of white ones, and I like the white ones. Everybody seems to like the white ones. There's another species out on Cedros Island that has been confusing and hasn't been named. It almost was named. Maybe it'll get named at some point. Very distinctive flowers presented horizontally a lot of the times when they actually are flowering. We'll see what happens with this one, whether that's a new species or not. Oh, let's see. I think the next one I stuck in these maps at the last minute so I could tell you where we were going, but now I can't remember where we're going. I think we're going to Isla San Benito. Let's see if that's where we go. Ah, yes. Isla San Benito. This is looking at the eastern island, a little after sunrise. Really rough channel crossing to get to here from 6 o'clock to midnight the night before. I don't know what percentage of the boat was seasick, but other than the crew, I think a pretty good percentage of them. It's really hard to take a shower in that kind of seas, it turns out. So anyway, that was the east. We landed, most of us landed on the west. They have the old lighthouse with the windows broken out, but it was kind of fun to go up into that. As always, you know, there's always more agaves sebastianas to take photos of. I mentioned our guide from Cedros Island, Jose Sanchez. He was one of the founders of Conservation de las Islas, and that's island conservation, Mexican and U.S. versions of the same thing, at least at the start. And he was the guy who hired the hunter who had the dog to try and get rid of rabbits on this on San Benito Island. So this is Jose, who helped with conservation efforts out there. Some of the people I was with on Sula's trip, they had been out there in '96. They looked and they looked and they looked and they found one plant of Dudleya linearis that had not been eaten by the rabbits. They found plenty of skeletons of pieces of dead linearis. Santa Barbara Botanic Garden tried to rescue a couple of pieces of Dudleya linearis. The one at UC Berkeley got taken out by mistake by the gardeners. And somebody else went there and did a cursory look. I think after that Santa Barbara trip, I think there was one more trip and they didn't find any. So Jose hired the hunter who had the dog. And anyway, when we came back in 2015, we found Dudleya linearis and we were really excited. Beautiful little plant. I was looking at this one and oh yeah, it's got a pollinator in here too. But pretty little plant, the Dudleya linearis, a success story on that one. But someone had collected a piece of it when it was common. There was a time when it was rare, when there were burrows out there, and then it was common, and they brought me a piece, and I said, "You collected that? That was really rare." He said, No, they were all over the place. And so then they released the rabbits. The rabbits ate them down to maybe 1 or 5 or 0 plants, and I had the one plant in the world that I knew for sure had roots. Fortunately, they got rid of the rabbits. There were plenty of seeds left still, and they came back. All right, and so I labeled this wrong. That was my plant. That was my Dudleya linearis, the last plant that was left. Anyway, so what I wanted us to do is think about Guadalupe Island here. And that was another trip I took. And when we go out to Guadalupe Island, I had 6 days on the island, and I wanted to find out what this Dudleya virens is. And Reed had talked about them being on 2 different cliffs, and they were a little different one to the next. And this one looked like something from San Clemente Island. I had a couple of bites out of it. I was walking along, and I thought I smelled a farm. And I went, what is that? And there was a goat there, one of the last goats on Guadalupe Island. And I said, well, what was that? And they said, Cabra 21. He lives over there. And he'd taken a bite out of this one plant that I could find. And there were dead goats around from where they had been hunted. And I went to the other side of the island. 6 days I saw this one plant and this one plant. So you see green leaves, they're long leaves, they're kind of papery dead leaves. These were white leaves, they were short leaves, they're waxy and tough dead leaves. So is it one or two species? I don't know. I couldn't collect them. There was only one of each, so I couldn't collect them. And they look a lot different than, say, Dudleya virens hassii from the Channel Islands. So anyway, better keep on going. We got to go out to one of the outer islets where presumably, this survived because it was on one of the outer islands, Dudleya guadalupensis. If somebody tries to sell you a Dudleya and it's blooming as a guadalupensis, it should have a flower stalk like that in cultivation or in the wild. There are a couple other pretty plants out there. If you grow up these from seed, that's in the genes. Start selecting them for the redder and the redder ones. I didn't have a permit to collect seeds, so if you could get a red one like this, I would just love to buy some plants from you. But this is the view of this and this whole area. That's Cystanthe that we were just looking at. That's one of the dominant plants here. And this is looking out to the island that John was able to get to by helicopter for the first time for anybody. And we're going to go to Santa Barbara Island, Dudleya traskii, same story. Release the rabbits. The lighthouse keepers have more rabbit stew instead of canned food. They think they're extinct. Ralph Philbrick finds 5. Reed says, he probably didn't plant them out there. It's still surviving. They get rid of the rabbits. It's coming back slowly, not as fast as we would like, but it's coming back. Dudleya noma. Here's a great big one with one flower and one rosette. They can get bigger than this, but this is about as small as you can flower them. Reed had seen this in the 1950s. He didn't describe it. I ended up naming it. He thought maybe there aren't enough. I ended up finding about 3,200 of them. This is a good success story. Another good success story, we got them to put a fence around it. Eventually the pigs, the cows, the deer, the elk were removed. And I was totally stunned. They went and counted them this year. They're almost 20,000. And we just thought it was naturally rare. But once you get rid of all the animals that are eating them and kicking them and stepping on them, there are a lot more. So that's a success story. Here's another picture of the noma. Here's a plant we thought it was more widespread, but it turns out that this one is not like the others. So it's not in Orange County. Dudleya cimosa ovatifolia, a pretty plant that's threatened by rock climbers. It's only in 2 canyons in the world. And rock climbers are the biggest threat. I'm a rock climber, but they scrape off the mosses that it grows with. It's just a real shame that this is one of the most threatened ones in California, and we really need to start working with the rock climbing advocacy group to get them protected. I've just been playing around for about 10, 15 generations to get redder and redder ones, working with the Huntington to maybe get some tissue cultured red ones out there. The underside of the leaf of these is red, and if you keep going enough generations, you get them red all over more and more of the year. Dudleya variedii is one that I've been working with quite a bit. This is the one that's gotten maybe the most publicity. Is a rare and endangered species named after Dave Verity, who's been to a lot of these conventions. It grows with lichens. How much of a relationship is there, we're not entirely sure. A fire went through and knocked out a few here or there. A bulldozer might have gone through another area, maybe knocked out some. And then a fire went through and burned in 2013, burned every single population and most of the plants in every single population. There were about 10 plants that flowered in 2014. A few more have flowered since. We were out here, the first time we looked, we could not find a single plant at this population. We went back a little later and we found a few little remnants. I took a tiny, tiny little twig because Fish and Wildlife Service says there's no way it's going to survive here. and managed to get it to grow. Anyway, we've gotten some publicity. It was on the cover of Science News that we're trying to recover this. We're trying to decide how many do you collect from the wild? Do you collect any? Do you just see what happens? One suggestion is collect every single one and every single seed. It's going to take 80 years for the lichen to recover. Is it an obligate relationship with the lichen? Do you wait for 80 years and then replant it? Or do you go on the safe side and you say, no, let's see what comes back naturally first. And I had some collections from '84 that are still alive, and so I'm propagating those and making sure that they're all pure. And so we're bulking up on the numbers. I've got maybe 200 plants in cultivation, self-pollinating the seeds, and we're trying to make sure that if it doesn't survive in the wild, we have plants from every separate population to help them survive. Grow a lot of them at UC Santa Cruz, and I want to keep doing that. You can see in the front some of my hybrids. I'm playing around with the white guys, but lots of rare and endangered in these two greenhouses I've got. One of the students that helps me some of the time. Anyway, I want to keep working on naming the new species, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 new species to name. Want to take a fresh look at things, see what's been overlooked. I want to work on the conservation of these. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's convincing people not to collect them, sometimes it's talking to the rock climbers, sometimes it's actively regrowing to replant. We might be gluing lichens back onto the rock that we get from an adjacent cliff, and we have to go over the side using ropes and collect it. And anyway, Kelly and Jeremy and I have talked about maybe doing a book. If you got Dudleya photos, send them to us. So I think that's about it. Thank you all very much.